Test, test, test. Should be good. So, test, test, test. Yeah, it's working. So, if you hold it like this, it works a little better than like.
Okay. So, I just said the most amazing things, and they were all missed. Okay. So now I guess people can hear me. So I'll do a little bit of a start over, but I won't. I don't know. Was the whole thing muted before? It might have been. All right. Well, I'm Lauren McLean. I'm running for the mayor of Boise, and really appreciate, Cameron, that you've invited me to be here tonight and try this Slido technology. And I have to say it's a little nerve-wracking because it's something new, even though I talk into Facebook on a weekly basis, but to know that there are more people watching and I have to look at the screen for questions, it's an experiment. And we are a 21st century city with a lot of technology that's changed in the last 16 years. And so I want to try it because, as I've said since the day that I announced, my sense after hearing from people around the city was that people feel not quite sure how to engage in City Hall. And they want leaders to be more accessible as our city continues to grow and more transparent about how we make decisions. And so this is part of that. I'm having listening sessions around the city, and I want to try new tools too to make sure that those that can't necessarily join us at a session have an opportunity to engage. So welcome to those of you watching on the live stream. And if this works, feedback, I might try to do this again throughout the course of the campaign. So Cameron, thanks for pushing me to try a new tool to talk with people. Just really quick, I'm running because after hearing from citizens throughout the city about concerns around rising costs of living, stagnant wages, feeling priced out of the homes they have, or concerned that their kids won't be able to buy one if they want to come back and start a family, and concerns that we aren't addressing and coming up with a real plan for transportation, recognizing that in 2040, this valley is going to have over 1 million people. And we need leaders who will set aside grudges and recognize that it's time to build the relationships that make it possible to develop a share. So we can build a transportation system that allows us as residents to move from our homes to our place of work, to other things throughout our lives in easier ways. So I think that as Boise grows, we are at this moment where I'm very optimistic about Boise, actually, and because something that's so special about Boise is our connection to people and place and neighborhoods and the active engagement of our citizens in our community. And many cities of our size don't have that or lose it as they're growing. And so at the moment, I think it's really important that leaders are accessible, 21st century ideas and to the table, embrace innovation, and in some ways use old school tools of being out in the community, talking to people, because I think that the solution is for us in our neighborhoods. And so I want to work with everybody to ensure that as we grow through this, that we keep that connection that we all have to people we live near, to the neighborhoods that we're part of, and the city that we love. So thanks for joining us online, and to all of you here tonight, and look forward to questions. Cameron, are you going to see them? We'll see them somewhere.
Explain what's going to happen.
Great.
And then we'll go. Yeah. Okay. We've already got a lot of questions, 19 questions so far, so keep them up. I know Brad's done 1 million of them probably. He's the Slido expert in the room. I just blew his cover. And yeah, so I'm going to put the questions on the screen and from the top down, and I'll highlight them as we go. And also to help with the brightness, I'm going to do a dark screen, see if that works better. So yeah, you can. Here we go. Just 1 second. Here's the first one. So, yeah, that's a little brighter. Great. So maybe we can read it.
Yeah, so the question is, what specific cities around the country can we look to as good examples for managing growth, and what specific policies have they implemented that you like? That's a great question, and it's really hard to compare cities to cities because each one is so unique. And I also believe that if there was a city that had the silver bullet of having addressed affordable housing, having addressed growth boundaries, et cetera, we'd all be trying to do the same thing. I will say that Minneapolis has gotten a lot of attention in the press lately as they've looked at how they changed their zoning laws to ensure that those triplexes can stay in the city, can be built in the city to increase density. And that's something that is worth taking a look at. And because we do know now that we need more houses in Boise, we're 10,000 right now. And as we continue to grow, we'll be even more units short. So there are programs and organizations and businesses even here in Boise that I think have great solutions. IndieDwell is building and taking all around the country small homes, and they put together a great project outside of the city limits called Windy Court. I'd like to see those things happen inside our city limits. And so on the specific policies pieces, I think that I'd like to look at Minneapolis's policy, and we're talking about that in the city right now. For my own platform that I released today, especially around affordable housing, I want to look at a program actually that's being done in Denver that's using accessory dwelling units. Those are almost like NDwell, smaller houses. And they're creating neighborhoods that are people-scaled neighborhoods with smaller homes so that they're more affordable and they can fit into compact spaces. I'd like to look at something like that. And on my platform, talked about incenting people that want to have accessory dwelling units if they're willing to commit to rent them at affordable rates. And also to make sure and follow some models. Seattle just recently has begun talking about it to make sure that we can protect some of the mobile home parks that we do have in Boise, because they are a great solution and stock when it comes to affordable housing. On transportation, I think there are a lot of models around the city, around the country to look at. You know, I think close to home, Salt Lake 20 years ago, you probably would never have believed that they would have the transportation system that they have now. And that happened because Democratic-leaning Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County had leaders that worked together with the entire Salt Lake Valley that tended about built relationships to have a conversation about what the future of their valley looked like, and recognize that at the end of the day, the success of the city hinged on the success of the valley, and then worked with the state to make transportation possible. And so I really look to that relationship building model as key. And then other cities also, such as Denver and even Seattle, that started transportation systems late. And that's why I think it's not too late for Boise if we are willing to start now, building those relationships, resetting the relationships, and starting to talk about a vision for the region. How can young people afford to live in Boise? So, you know, I want to tell us first about like when my husband and I came here, we were young, just graduated from college, we were married for less than a year. And my husband got a job at Hewlett-Packard, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. We totally fell in love with this place, didn't expect to be here, and fell hook, line, and sinker with the place, and we're here 3 months later. At that time, 20 years ago, it was another growth bubble. And then people were talking about the number of people moving in, the rising cost of living. But we were lucky enough to be able to buy a home before we were 25. And I don't know that many kids today, or young adults, I should say, today in Boise can do that. And you know, it's a multifaceted problem, and one that we've got to take a deep look at in terms of how, as a city, we make investments to increase the power of like the buying power of the wages that we have here. Because as Brookings Institute pointed out this spring, our wages have been stagnant now for quite a while, and they've been stagnant and they've lost buying power. And so what we see is that the cost of living is increasing. So they would say we need to make investments in affordable housing. We need to make investments in a transportation system. Look at how we bring to scale some of the partnerships that fund pre-K here, because that helps young people. And so there are a lot of different things that we ought to be looking at, as well as figuring out how we take and grow homegrown businesses, because those are the ones that create the most opportunity, I think, in the city. How we encourage businesses that come here to invest rather than to be asking for handouts. And then how we harness, I think, the economic opportunity around climate, clean energy, and innovation in terms of what the jobs of the future look like. I think as we look at this from a systems approach, we can move the needle a bit in terms of how affordable this place is for young people. Because the last thing we want is for folks to have to move beyond the city, because the strongest cities have vibrant neighborhoods that are made of people of all ages, that look all different ways, and that have all different incomes. And we've got to keep that in each neighborhood of the city. Look at this.
So, got another comment about the quality of intermittent, but since you're so close, I don't think we need the mic, so I'm going to go to the regular.
Yeah, because I keep getting closer and closer.
Yeah, no, it'll work good for this.
Thanks for being part of our first experiment with it.
So I think the trick with this, as much as it kind of is annoying, is to hold it kind of like that. Yeah.
All right, we're going to try again. Oh, okay, it worked. I heard myself over there on another computer. I guess there's a lag. I didn't realize that. Okay, Ethan had the question of how do we accommodate, how do we balance the necessity of accommodating growth with the concerns about residents around traffic, noise, unwanted activity, et cetera. You know, I think that really that's the crux of leadership in times of change like this. And we are growing, and as a city, we'll continue to grow. And at the end of the day, I think the only time when we will stop growing is when the economy has tanked, and we don't want that to happen. And so what's important in this growth moment is the way leaders engage the public in the decision making. And there are plans that have existed for a long time that we refer to. Yet often what I've experienced is that people come to hearings or they find out about projects late and they're frustrated because they don't understand how the decisions were made or how to engage in the process. And so I think that the more we can be clear as leaders about how people can engage, the more we talk about the importance of coming up with solutions together and are clear and transparent in who we're talking with, who's influencing the decisions, and how important it is to have public feedback, is the way that we balance both neighborhood needs and concerns and the reality of growth moving forward. What I think is magical about this place is the, as I mentioned earlier, is how engaged people love to be in Boise. And when we see that engagement at City Hall, it's actually too late in many ways. We really should figure out how to engage folks in planning the future and having conversations about the future earlier. And we had a comprehensive plan that often, as a city council person, I refer to that was worked on about almost 10 years ago now. And sometimes I do wonder if we ought not look at that again, because so much has changed within our city and within our communities since that was written. Typically, those are written for a 20-year span. And we knew then that Boise would grow, but I do think that having deeper conversations neighborhood by neighborhood about the realities of how many houses we need to build here for the people that live here now, about the realities of what a transportation system looks like, and then have a conversation about also how we protect the open spaces we love, the beautiful river we have, and the farmland that rings our city boundaries is all really important part of the equation when we try to balance the two. The next one is how I plan on addressing NIMBY neighborhood associations. And I'll just say on that, I just refer to the answer I just gave. It's about engagement. It's about the way we communicate and talk with the public. dignity and respect, and recognizing that as our city is changing, there's frustration around that. And I think that if as a leader we can give voice to those frustrations, recognize that they're real, and then talk through what we need to ease the impact of growth, which is to address affordable housing, to address transportation, and those require relationships and new ways of thinking. I think that we get to where we all want to get without pointing fingers at neighborhood associations or individual residents. And unfortunately, that's happening too much right now. The number one change I want to make. Today I released my platform. It's online at McLean, that's MCLEAN, for Boise, FOR, not the number, .com, McLeanforboise.com. And you'll see what I want to focus my time on and say, it's not so much change as where we go next. And I've said before, the mayor sets the tone and agenda, and that's a lot about, after 16 years, the change that you would see is a new leader, new ideas, new energy, and a recognition that Boise's not where we are. We aren't the city that we were 16 years ago, and we need to try new things to address the challenges that we're facing right now. But in my first term, I think the most important thing is that I would set aside old grudges, work super hard to build new relationships, and we've seen throughout the region that there's a new generation of leaders coming forward that want to do that, because we love this place and know that it's time to get serious about some of these issues. And so in my first term, my goal would be to have an actual plan for regional transit, working with and often behind leaders throughout the valley, so that we could begin to work on it after that. Do you value increasing transparency? Oh, sure. So the question is, do I value increasing transparency in the political process, and how then would I do that? I'm sorry, I just realized I'm super close. So yes, I think that the more transparent we are, the easier it is to start a conversation with residents about where we're headed and why we made decisions. So on my platform online, you'll see that transparency is super important to me. And there are a couple things I do right away. One is, we're a modern city, but sometimes you have to look back to your past to really be well positioned for the future. And what I love about Western politics historically has been how accessible Western leaders have been. I would institute an open door policy that if I'm in the office, in my office, not in a meeting, and somebody walks in and wants to have a conversation, I will post my schedule online daily, because as mayor, but I'm driving the agenda. And so I think it's only fair that the public understands who I'm meeting with, because that also helps folks understand who it is that's involved in the agenda that I'm putting together. I'm not taking corporate donations and not taking money from corporate PACs, which I also think is really important, because this race is about people. It's powered by people when it comes to the 22,000 doors we've already knocked on. It's funded by people. And the whole idea is that as Boise's growing, the most important part of our community are the people that live in it. And we want to create a city for everyone, no matter where people live, what they do, what political party they are. But we all know that what we have in common is that we live here. Sure. So there's a question from Sam. Are you? Yeah, that's what I thought. He's here. About common sense licensing for accessory dwelling, short-term rentals. So that's something I'm starting to look into, because for so long we've been told we can't do anything about short-term rentals, and folks have asked us as a city, can't you do something about short-term rentals? And I've just recently learned that we actually can do some things about short-term rentals, including licensing. And I think if you like any business that is in the city, you can get licenses. And so this would be just a basic licensing approach, following, even we licensed the scooter companies. We tried to license Uber, but then it took so long that they went to the state. So as technology has changed and the way people share things and do business has changed, I think a 21st century city needs to reflect reflect that. And so neighbors have been concerned in some areas that there are too many or that they're driving up the cost of long-term rental rates. And so since we know that since I've learned that we actually do have a tool, I don't think it's right to say we can't do something. And so I want to look into whether licensing would at least give us a little teeth in terms of enforcement concerns that folks have had. Sure. So the question is, how do you plan to work with neighboring cities and other governments to tackle issues around growth? And that's where I'll go back to my deeply held belief, and I think maybe this person on the question does too, that these issues are regional issues. And I really believe that our city's success hinges on the success of this valley and the success of the state. And so we might not all agree politically, but that should not be a reason to not work together. So if we can set aside some of the old histories and old relationships that have existed for quite a while and recognize that it's our job to make the best decisions for our residents, it's about building relationships. And as a master's student at Boise State, I studied public administration, but my thesis was actually on building consensus around contentious natural resource issues. And so while growth isn't necessarily a natural resource issue, the ideas behind building consensus and the relationships that it requires to get to the point where you can figure out what you agree on and then start to work on a vision together are the same, no matter what the issue. And I really want to put those things into play as we build relationships with Canyon County, with the cities in Canyon County, other cities in Ada County, of course, and then the Highway District too. And at the end of the day, especially with something like transportation, right now we're arguing over the tool and whether or not we have the tool to fund it. If we can build those relationships and have a conversation about what's in the best interest of residents in every place in this region in terms of how to get to work, how to make their commutes more affordable, how to make their housing more affordable through relationships, you can get to the point where you find a few things that you want to work on together. And then I think it's more likely the state is willing to work with us too. So I'm just going to rephrase that one as why am I the person why am I asking for your vote? This question says, why would I be better than Beater? But what I want to say is that this isn't necessarily about a person. And I hate it at times when this has become personal. And because what I am running, because I think Boise's at a moment where 16 years, there's been a great legacy. That's a long time. 20 years is even longer. And there are things right now that have not been prioritized or addressed. And I don't think you can do that with the same tools that you would have used 16 years ago. And so, as I've said, in a new world, there's new technology. We're trying it today. We have to be uncomfortable with new situations, be willing to take risks, and be a little bit bolder. And recognize that not everything has to be done by City Hall. But there's a lot of answers out in our community if we're willing to open doors, almost like set the table for disruptors in the housing space and in the transportation space, and try new ideas rather than thinking about what we might have used at the turn of the century. Oh, one about stagnant wages in the valley. So this is what I started to touch on when I mentioned the Brookings report. So I don't know if any of you have read the Brookings report. Yes, no. I found it fascinating because my husband's in the technology space, and they talked about how the jobs in the valley have changed over time, probably the last 10, 15 years. Brookings pointed out, as I said earlier, that wages are stagnant, poverty has increased, and cost of living has increased. So all of that, people are feeling it. And those are the stories. Like, I was in DC for a work meeting, and so reached out to Brookings and actually sat down with the folks that wrote the report. And it was interesting because their data reflected the stories that I'm hearing from people all around the city, that you can't afford to buy a house with what you're making, that it's hard to find a rental property because there's so much competition for the ones that are more affordable, et cetera. And so, but what I wanted to know was how, as a mayor, you can solve that problem, because and of course, right away they talked about, and they knew, well, you can't change the minimum wage, and not that that would help everybody, but it would help some people. We can't do that right now. The state said no, although there's a ballot measure to try to change that. And so they really talked about the importance of making investments. And that's why I talked about coming up with new solutions for affordable housing. And these are the things they say in their report and they call out. Come up with better solutions for affordable housing. Invest in a 21st century transit system because soon it's too late. They did call out the importance and kind of the bright shining light around clean energy and policy in Boise. And as a council person, I sponsored the 100% clean energy citywide by 2035 plan. And as mayor, I will beat that goal and aim to try to get there ideally by 2030. They talked about that as a good step in creating innovation and economic opportunity in the city. And then they talked about the importance of partnerships with the university to make sure the right job, the right students are coming out with, or the students are coming out with the right training, investing in pre-K because it makes daycare more affordable. Those different things that you don't think of as related to wages, at the end of the day, affect your paycheck, what you're paying for gas, or if you have to pay for gas at all. What you're paying for your rental or for the mortgage in the house that you bought, what you're paying for daycare, which I might have already said, and then how it is that your kids can go to school and come out with the degrees that they need. And so, and then they all, in that report too, they talk about the importance of getting companies to be willing to help invest in those, in what they called infrastructure, which is all these kind of additive things that help with pocketbooks every month, and instead of asking for more tax cuts. So there's no one silver bullet Paul can come up with. But again, they said the power is in the convening of all the bright minds and investments that we need to make to chart the course of the future that we all want to have here, which will and need and must include higher paying jobs. Oh my gosh. So I have this, so the next, thank you. Sorry. The next question is, now I'm actually starting able to read backwards. Lighthearted question. Have you read any good books lately? Somebody asked me that the other day and I'm like, oh my goodness, my book stack next to my bed is almost as tall as I am, which is not very tall. Because I have not had time to read the way I like to read. I love to read. But people also keep giving me books. So we had 3 days of vacation this summer, and I'm also like terrible at the names of books. I always have to just describe them. But I did read a couple that are on like women in leadership. People keep like coming to my house and giving me books with little notes in them. So I read Melinda Gates' book. What was that? Was that The Moment of Lift, or was that another one? And then I read something about magic that was Brene, no, the Eat, Pray, Love. Oh, Elizabeth Gilbert. Here's her other book right here. I read that. And right now I'm actually, then I decided I have to read like a regular book. And I love historical fiction. And for the life of me, I can never remember the name of the book or the author. But it's like this brownish earth tone cover. And there's like Grace is in the name. This is super embarrassing. And it's about actually the story of Jews that were being protected in Italian occupied France during World War II. And then they heard that the Allies had landed in Italy and that Mussolini had given up. And so they started leaving this town in the Alps and climbed over the peak into Italy, and they end up down in the coast near Cinque Terre. But unbeknownst to them, as they were leaving in the void of leadership, when Mussolini surrendered, but the Allies hadn't come far enough north, the Germans came in. And so then it's the story of all of the farmers in the countryside outside of the Ligurian coast that are trying to hide this pocket of Jews. So it's really thick. And the rediscovered books warned me. It was like, there's a lot of words in it, which is true. But it's a fascinating story and one that I didn't know about. I didn't realize that part of France had been Italian occupied France. You always think of Vichy France. But instead there was a section in the Alps where the Italians had moved in and occupied it as part of the German forces. So that's what I'm trying slowly to read right now. And then also reading lots of briefings on affordable housing, transportation, and other government ideas. Okay. Okay, sure. So the question from Jose, is that you? Is that your question? Is regarding the funding of large projects like transportation, library. Do you plan on pressuring the Idaho legislators to allow local option taxes? I think local option taxes are really important tools that cities ought to have, and they do in all but 3 states where the states haven't allowed them to have them. But I think that what I want to take issue with is this word pressuring, is that that's what we've tried to do for 16 years is pressure, 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 fight, 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 and we've gotten nowhere. And so I actually think that rather than talking about right away about the tool for how we fund something, that it's important to start over and get to the point where we have a vision around what it is that needs to be funded valley-wide. And then once we have that vision, think about how we implement it. And then part of that implementation would be figure out how it needs to be funded. I think we might find ourselves in the same place, but it's a different approach. And so I would like, and then I believe that there'd be more willingness on the part of the state to work with this valley in general on funding. And you know, there are other ways of funding things well. And the next one, if elected, would you consider mounting a lobbying campaign on behalf of the city in an effort to pass a local option tax bill? That's been tried several times in the last 16 years, and it hasn't worked. So I'll just clump it with the last one. And that I think it's an important tool, but I think if we got it and we thought we'd use it for transportation, we'd actually find that our neighboring cities and counties might not actually have the same vision of what to do with that penny. And so rather than going immediately into the pushing for the penny, I think it's important to build consensus around a vision and then figure out how to fund it. So on this one, the question is, what are your thoughts on the letter sent to BSU regarding diversity initiatives? I'm going to assume it was the letter from the folks that were against the diversity initiatives, rather than all the good people that stood up for the diversity initiatives. Look, in this world and in our community, diverse perspectives are super important. We know that from a business perspective, businesses do better when there are more diverse perspectives at the table. And we need to and must recognize, and we don't always do, that folks from marginalized communities have really struggled to get where they're at. And it's important that we create ways to acknowledge the importance of equity and access and diversity. And the university has programs, as they should, because they have a diverse student population. And students at the university need the support to get through, need encouragement to be there, to feel welcomed as part of the community. And everyone needs to understand that. And so I think that those programs at Boise State are key, not only to the success of the students that need them, but to the success of the community at the university in general. And any efforts to dismantle them are really not recognizing that we need diverse voices at the table, whether that be in a classroom, in an office, or around a board table, or at City Hall. Oh, the dog. So this next one is, can I speak to white nationalism and how you think this will affect Boise as the city continues to grow? And how would you handle this as mayor? I think, one of the other books I read in the last year, and then my daughter read this summer, was Madeleine Albright's book on fascism, and what she talked about the rise of nationalism throughout the world from a historic perspective in terms of what she experienced as a kid in Europe, and then what she saw as Secretary of State, and then what she's seen in the last decade that's been really concerning to her. It's a serious problem. It's bubbled up. I think it always existed. It's bubbled up in ways that I think none of us imagined would in the last 4 years, particularly. I'm going to point to what happened in Charlottesville. The mayor of Charlottesville at the time when those white nationalist rallies were happening is actually part of a fellowship program that I'm in. We have a small class of 24 folks at the Aspen Institute called Riddell Fellows, and we're all local elected officials. And I thought that what Mike Signer did in terms of attempting to address it after it happened, well, there were troubles beforehand, but since then he has developed programs and pulled together mayors and other elected officials to talk about how we address this in our communities. And he's actually somebody I would look to as a guide for how best as a leader to set the tone and to address it. And at the end of the day, there's no place for that in our city. We are a welcoming city. And yet we all know that it exists everywhere, and to say otherwise is, just kind of putting our heads in the sand. So I think it's always important to lead with our values, and that is that all are welcome. If people feel unwelcome or unsafe, then it's up to us that have the privilege to feel otherwise to take action, and that the language that we use around our openness and embracing of all people, but then what's the word? Denouncing of the white nationalism or hate is super important. And whether it's a city issue or not, it's incumbent upon leaders never to sit silent. And Joe Biden said this last week when he was here in Boise, that when leaders are silent on any issue, whether it be gun violence, white nationalism, other things that you might not think are city issues, then they're not doing their job. And so I see that as very important to be clear about the values that I'd have and to set the tone for our city in general. And to make it clear really to all of us that it is important that we denounce hate and stay true to our values of being welcoming to all. Oh, this is a great question, something I should think about more. It says, what would you do to help older and aging populations who might be vulnerable and have unique needs? I've heard from a lot of retired folks, the older and aging population, which, now like 70 is the new 40. So I don't know like where we really are on that. But I've heard from a lot of people their concerns about being able to stay in the homes that they've always lived in because of the rising property taxes and values that are tied to that. And a couple years ago, the state changed the homeowners exemption that we saw this year with the increase of property tax values and the change of the way money was taken off of our values if we were homeowners really impacted residents. And so I really would like to do some more research on whether or not there are ways that we could help seniors and those who are wanting to stay in their homes not feel that the same brunt that they're feeling right now. But we need to do a little bit more research on what that might look like. Just the other day, was it Monday? Someone let me know about a program in Phoenix that freezes the valuations of homes when people reach the age of 65, which I found fascinating. It's not, I'd hate to see a property tax revolt like what happened in California in the 70s with Prop 13. We do not want to be there. That'll hurt our city and our state. But I think that there might be some other things that we could look at. And this program out of Phoenix was fascinating, so I need to do some research on it. So on this one, this got lots of stars, but the question is, how do I plan to increase accessibility and transparency? I've been having listening sessions and will continue to do those around the city as mayor. I mentioned that I'd have the open door policy. I'll post my calendar and maybe even do more of these if we can figure out the sound thing long term. And open to your ideas. If you have more ideas of what you've seen from other cities or governments in terms of leaders being accessible and transparent, I'd love to see them. National candidates that I look to for inspiration. Oh, that's a great one. National issues are so different than local issues, but at the end of the day, national candidates are talking about things that we all care deeply about. I'm always amazed that they could actually campaign for presidential elections when campaigning for a mayor's race is very tiring. So sometimes I look at them all and just think, if I could have half your energy, that would be awesome. There are a couple candidates right now. I mean, I can think about presidential candidates, but then I think about leaders from before as well. Current presidential candidates that I find really inspiring. Elizabeth Warren, because I never would have thought 10 years ago, and she might not have either, that she'd be where she was. And she cares so deeply about issues around economic opportunity and justice, and look where it's to them. I find Pete Buttigieg incredibly inspiring. I've known him for quite a while. And again, to think about one, how smart he is, but how committed he is, and that he's managed to jump a field when nobody really thought he could do it, by talking about the issues that he talks about and the way he does, I think is incredibly inspiring. And he's got some great platforms. But there are some other not national candidates that I really look to as examples. My friend Amanda Edwards is now running for Senate in Texas, and she is a city council person in Houston, a city that I lived in until I was 16. And after Hurricane Katrina, the way that she stepped in and engaged the public in trying to come up with environmental solutions to mitigate against future hurricanes, and then to clean up the mess that existed, and to provide resources to people in her community, I thought was incredibly inspiring. And then Ben McAdams is now a congressman in Utah. He was the mayor of Salt Lake County, and I often look to him. Right now, actually, I call him often on, like, how do you juggle your family while you're campaigning? How do you talk with your kids about the negative stuff that's going to come and all those things? But when he was mayor in Salt Lake County, I was so impressed with the work he did around housing, homelessness, and then building the relationships you need to have regional consensus around issues that grow economies. And Salt Lake is an example of an economy that's really taken off. All right, and to end on, how is my campaign funded? I did? Okay. Oh, sure. And I'll take two, but just say, like, campaigns in Idaho are funded. There's sunshine reports. We have some of the most progressive campaign finance laws in the country, where in terms of what we have to report, how we have to report it. So campaigns are funded by people and corporations writing checks. Candidates have to turn in sunshine reports. And any issue advocacy organizations do politics, they too have to turn in sunshine reports so people can see where the money's coming from and what it's going to. My campaign's funded by individuals, and I also hope to receive the endorsement of a couple advocacy groups whose values I share, and then I would accept those issue-oriented PAC dollars as well, but no corporate PACs or corporate donations. Oh, now it's supposed to be further. Sorry. So the why choose to run now is a question I get, and maybe this is part of me just wrapping things up as well. This spring, when I was holding listening sessions around this city, what I was hearing from people was a deep concern about where we are right now, a struggle to pay for housing, fear that, as I said earlier, that they wouldn't be able to stay in their homes or find a place to live. Recognition that we've long fought over transportation issues rather than coming up with solutions, and concern that there was not transparency on the part of the administration to work with the public. And as I heard things, and the more I thought about how much I love this place and the moment that we're in, I thought it was important to run now. 16 years is a really long time, and our city is a really different city than it was back in 2003. And 4 years more of the same, as our city is no longer the same, was too long. And it was just kind of a scary decision. It was a tough decision. We waited for my daughter as a family. But I really believe that I have something to offer. And knowing that, and having heard so much from the public about the concerns we have, and because I love this place so much, I thought it was time to address these issues rather than to take the easy path and just sit back and wait. So with that, wait, don't turn it off yet. I'm just going to say to the people that are left, thanks for hanging on and for letting us know when this worked and didn't work. Would love to try it again sometime. Thanks, Cameron, for doing this. Oh, great. Okay, yeah, you can turn that off. Okay, so and on that, I'd just like to say that I really hope to earn your vote. If you already have your vote and you want to get involved, this is a people-run campaign. We'd love to have you help volunteer, knock on doors, call voters, connect with your friends. So check us out at McLeanforBoise.com. Thanks so much for joining, and I'd love to earn your vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Have a great night.